Hey everyone, I'm so excited because I'm finally here with Rook, and I've wanted to do a podcast with her for so long, and we finally actually got to set something in stone. So if you want to let everyone know where they can find you and what they can expect currently on your stream and or YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be here too. We have already been talking about the fact that sometimes it seems like you get to sort of pass each other like ships in the night when it comes to content creation, and it's so good to get to just sit down and talk and say hello to everybody. My name is Rook. I stream over at BirdofChess, which is sort of a bit of a pun off of a play of words, if you will, off of the name Rook, which is both a type of bird and a chess piece, but don't tell anybody. I don't know how to play chess. What I do know how to play are MMOs. So I focus on mostly Final Fantasy XIV and Guild Wars 2, but I play a ton of different MMOs. And then I also like to do RPGs, JRPGs, indie titles, that kind of stuff. So you can usually find me with a new YouTube video once a week, and then live 3 days on Twitch at twitch.tv BirdofChess. I'm also BirdofChess on YouTube. And then on Saturdays, I am really happy to be a part of Aetheryte Radio, which is Gamer Escape's Final Fantasy XIV podcast. So I'm usually there. I make appearances on the Lightbringers podcast, the Jebra Unity as well every now and then for Guild Wars 2. And yeah, I like to be around, and I like to, be a part of the community with everybody, and a part of my stream team, Rainbow Arcade, which is an LGBTQIA plus stream team full of amazing broadcasters. So do a little bit of everything, but everybody is always welcome.
That's awesome. And I love the amount of energy that you bring. That's so perfect. And I was actually going to ask about your name too, because I kept telling people that I was going to have a podcast with BirdofChess because I like to keep people updated. I'm like, yeah, this is what I have set up. And they're like, Rook? And I'm like, yes.
Yes, that's me. It's Rook. It's funny because I never mind if somebody calls me like Bird or Bird of. The only one, and this happens sometimes, is BirdofChess, which is just one little letter. And I know so many people who will say it on accident. It is not, it is nothing. It's nothing like ridiculous. But I would sit there and I'm like, you were so close. It was very close.
I feel like I would just kind of like spin off of that. Like I would just get to the point where it would be like, I almost expect it now. And so I'd have like an emote or something that was, I don't know, something. I was going to go off on something lewd, but it's probably not the best time.
Right. Yeah. We probably shouldn't do that right at the beginning of the podcast.
No,
we'll save that for
not.
the end. So,
so without playing chess, and obviously it's the pun in the spinoff, like you'd mentioned, where did your name come from? And why is it Rook, then BirdofChess, like on Twitch and YouTube?
I mean, to be completely honest, I would love for there to be some sort of, great, cheeky story about all of this. The truth was, I've gone by Rook online and in my gaming spaces for ages, but as you can imagine, it was taken everywhere. So when I was trying to come up with what I would do or what I wanted to call myself, a friend at the time suggested maybe BirdofChess, and I went, hey, that's actually kind of fun. That's clever. Birds have always been something that just like as far as imagery goes and, different memories go, something that's played a role in my life. And I liked that sort of, I guess, spin-off of it, so we went with it, and it's kind of been a thing. And now it's just sort of a joke that one day, eventually, maybe we'll have a learn how to play chess stream, but it kind of dangles in front of everybody, We'll see, maybe one
That would
day.
be amazing. I'd have to tune in for that one because I actually don't know how to play chess. And my fiance was trying to figure out how to do the overlay for you. And he's like, should I do a chessboard? And I was like, oh, I don't know. He's like, well, what does her name mean? And I'm like, well, I think it is Rook like chess, but I don't know how to play chess. So I don't know, but...
That's fair. When the new, when Delabrum Reginae in Final Fantasy XIV came out, and there's that last boss that's like the chess boss, yes! Everybody said, Rook, look, it's the only chess that you know how to play. And I was like, wow, thanks everyone. Really love it. Really appreciate. You're right. You're not wrong.
But at least you figured it out. It took me probably 3 or 4 times of doing it, and then chat actually explaining it to me to actually figure out how the movement worked. And they're like, the dots are above your head. And I'm like, yeah, I moved. And they're like, but you started too quick before the ability actually went off. And I was like, okay.
It got me the first time too, because I saw it and I did the same thing where I was like, oh, I need to go. And then I was so confused and lost when it started actually triggering. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm not even in the right place anymore. Where am I supposed to head? So eventually, yeah, I think it was the second one we figured it out. But it's a fun mechanic, honestly. Unfortunately, chess is not really, the actual game of chess is not really something that I know how to play.
And so the actual games, what did you start off with content creation? Was it an MMO? Was it an RPG or a JRPG?
No, it was competitive Overwatch, actually.
No way!
Yes. I streamed competitive Overwatch when I first started streaming. I was obsessed with it. I loved the aesthetic of Overwatch. I loved the fast, sort of action-oriented combat with your team and that kind of team play. I was so invested in it. So I was a support and heal main, and I made it up to Grandmaster, actually.
Oh, wow.
And it was a totally different environment, 110%.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there was eventually a point where I started really getting into MMOs, and I hadn't started out streaming them because my partner, had said, I don't know if anybody would really want to watch an MMO. And I was kind of going, yeah, I mean, like, esports are a thing. I don't know if there's really like a community. And then lo and behold, when I started streaming, MMOs, I just went, oh no, this is what I want to stream. Like, this is what I could stream for years. This is what I love. And there is a huge community, and there's so many people that play it and are so excited about it. So that really ended up being my home, and that's mostly what we do. But every now and then I think back to those Overwatch days.
That's fantastic. I really had no idea. And speaking of that, it was kind of so I don't know if you ever watched other people do Overwatch comp like Siegel, and he had actually mentioned that he also was really serious about World of Warcraft, but he was nervous to stream it because it was an MMO, and he's like, how do I keep people entertained? What do I do? So it's fantastic that you actually swapped and made it work, and you find so much stuff, and there's so much content that as long as you can be, that excited and have that much energy, it really works. So that's really cool. I'm like,
yeah, it's
totally fangirling over here about that.
Oh gosh, I mean, you play a ton of MMOs too. What made you want to sort of take that leap and go, I want to play these and I want to broadcast them?
I was a really big lore nerd for World of Warcraft, and I had a guild, and a bunch of people were like, I wanted to explain to them different stories of how things integrated with the raids that we're doing, or when everybody was really upset about Warlords of Draenor. One of my favorite areas was, I loved the Arakoa, and it was really neat that once you actually got to Hellfire Citadel, you actually have, oh my gosh, I forget the boss's name now. The bird. Oh my gosh. I can't remember his name, but you actually talk about how the Arakoa fell, and how he ended up getting his wings back and his flight and being able to be as prestigious as he was and end up being a boss in Hellfire Citadel because he was essentially, brainwashed or whatever. But it was really cool. And nobody wanted to listen to me in Guild. And they were like, why don't you just stream? Maybe people will listen to you if you do that there. And I'm like, okay.
Wow, Guildmates.
So completely different, but...
telling you like it is. Like,
Exactly.
Xandrii, love that you love this lore stuff, but why don't you take it to Twitch so that we don't have to listen to it all the time?
Exactly. So what MMO did you start with? And was it what you actually started with when you moved over to streaming? Was that the MMO, or did you eventually move into others?
Yeah, I actually, funnily enough, I started with World of Warcraft. Which was really only because so this is kind of the funny story. I've always been a longtime fan of Final Fantasy. Mm-hmm. And when I was younger, when Final Fantasy XI came out, I was so excited. I was so excited about this game, and this idea of being able to play Final Fantasy with people all around the world is the coolest thing ever. And so I remember looking up the PC specs and being like, my computer is not these, because my mom always got terrible low spec computers that barely did anything except for run Microsoft Word. Yep. And in my head as a kid, I don't know anything about technology. I just want to play Final Fantasy XI. So I look at it and I went, these aren't really system requirements, right? They're system suggestions, probably. So I bought it. And of course it didn't run, surprising literally nobody. So it wasn't until years later that I actually had like a PC as an adult, after I graduated college, that I actually had a PC that could run stuff. And a lot of the consoles and things that I had, I just didn't realize, that MMOs were starting to branch over to them and all that good stuff. So it wasn't until I got PC and then I, started really playing on that. And my partner, who's now my husband, was like, hey, you've always wanted to do MMOs. Why don't you play World of Warcraft? So we started out and they had done a ton of stuff with World of Warcraft. And I ended up sort of finding that it wasn't really like, I love certain things about WoW. But like you were saying, especially with lore and story and cinematography, and there's so much good lore in WoW, but I was really wanting an experience that felt more as though I were part of this huge, expansive narrative that I, could be a part of and that I understood and that was really compellingly told. And so I started looking into a bunch of others like SWTOR and ESO and all these other, MMOs, and eventually found Final Fantasy XIV, which was the MMO that I started with streaming with. But that was after I had already, tried a bunch of others. And then a few years later, people suggested Guild Wars 2, and I fell in love with Guild Wars 2. And then those two kind of became the staples of the channel, though I play a lot of ESO in my own time as well, because I'm also a big Elder Scrolls fan.
That's amazing.
It's a story, it's a journey. I still haven't played 11. I should. I have it. I could play it.
It's almost scary to me now, 11, because I've played 14 and seen how all of the raids work with their lockout and their loot. And I started with WoW, like you and we had mentioned, and I've now gone into Guild Wars 2. I haven't gotten to their raiding yet, but I was talking to Lama Todd yesterday, and he has played 11, and he was like, oh yeah, did you know the raids, the way they worked was you had to tune, and then you had to get all of these pieces for an extra piece, and there could only be one group with 18 people, and you weren't guaranteed that piece, but one piece would drop from the boss. And I'm like, what?
It sounds, people have such great memories of it because it was so wild, right? Kind of like WoW Classic or like a lot of the older MMOs, right? I remember somebody describing to me once some sort of boss that's like the equivalent of like a critical engagement or Notorious Monster, I believe is what they were called, because Eureka kind of modeled off of 11. And it was literally this fight that took multiple days, and you would have to have people come and swap out with you to continue fighting this thing. Like, this is not even a joke. It was like the longest fight in any game, I think, at the time. And it was this brutal thing where it was essentially like a fate out in the world sort of deal. But it was one of the hardest pieces of content in the whole game. So you had to have like a schedule with everybody where you're like, okay, and then this person's going to tag in and that person's going to tag out. And I'm going to sleep for 3 hours. And I cannot imagine at this point trying to do that.
No,
with all the rest of our schedules,
I mean, it's going to sound very weird saying this, and I'm not exactly sure with 14 what you would have preferred, but do you remember when TP was a thing where you had to use it to sprint and then certain AoE abilities? And so I was on stream once and I had talked about how I actually thought it was kind of neat because when I started, it was still in the game at the end of Stormblood. And I was saying that it kind of gave that extra bit of difficulty. So even though this boss being absolutely ridiculous and having to have people tag in and out is kind of an extra bit of difficulty that might have been fun to work around. I don't know. I'm kind of weird about it. I actually thought TP, like for quick knock on a bard, was cool. I don't know. Just the extra little bit of having to use energy.
I agree. I like having like strategic gameplay,
Yeah.
I'm not sad that they took TP away forever because the way it was implemented, right? Did it like really impact a lot of classes across the board or like play styles? No. But at the same time, I do agree. It's kind of fun to have different areas or resource groups where like your character shines.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, obviously, I think they've tailored that down more to the actual classes themselves as opposed to things like your passive skills and all the other stuff that you might have to deal with. But no, I mean, I'm also one of those people that like cleric stance. So I can't, I can't complain. Stance dancing was the worst, but did I like it for some reason? Because it added something extra with healing? Yeah.
Absolutely. And so how do you actually figure out what game you want to play? Do you have a designated time slot during the week for each game, or is it in between patches, or does your community help pick what you're going to play for stream?
Yeah, it's been sort of a journey with that, We obviously started out with Overwatch, and when I started transitioning into things like MMOs, for a while, Final Fantasy 14 was the big one, and I was still doing Overwatch. And when I realized that 14 was kind of a game that I wanted to build a lot of the rest of my content and community around, I realized that in order to do that, right? I mean, there are true variety broadcasters out there for sure, right? But there are also overlapping groups of interest that a lot of times will carry over between multiple different games. And so for me, I found that if I was doing like extreme variance variety, especially as you're like a growing streamer, when you get established, you get to the point where you've got a comfortable community that's there,
Right.
you've got that baseline. But when I was starting out, years ago, it was like, well, I've got to be consistent enough that people come from day to day. So I started with 14. And then I started to look for other games that had like intersections of interest with that, right? So the other Final Fantasy titles that's obviously one. JRPGs as a whole is a genre. That's obviously another. But I did find that with MMOs, there's sort of a niche there that's specific to MMOs because people might like JRPGs or they may have never touched one. They may have come into Final Fantasy because they played WoW or because they played something else, So MMOs become their own kind of genre and community. And especially as we have patch content and like you were saying, cycles where there might be less to do in one game or more to do in another, people tend to rotate between them. So that became my focus. And I started looking for MMOs that shared specific sort of commonalities. Again, overlapping interest groups, a strong narrative, a fantasy world, a community that seemed to value the same things. And I listened to my own community as they gave feedback, and I would sort of trial different things, right? So I would try Guild Wars 2 one day a week, or I would try something like that. And then over the course of like a month, I'd see how it was looking, how the community was responding, how I felt about it, how numbers were looking. And if it felt like something that was truly going to become kind of an organic part of the channel and that had shared interest, I would start adding that into the rotation more long term. So that's kind of how I built it. And then when it came to things like YouTube, that opened up even more possibilities for me because I started podcasting more. And I didn't always have time to do, drop everything in our MMOs and do a full playthrough of Divinity or, whatever massive games that I was trying to play. Yeah, it's like, it's tough because you want to play these other games, but then it's like, well, do I do it one day a week? Do I go for 3 weeks as hard as I can? It's not always easy. And I just found personally that moving some of that more single player content to things like YouTube freed me up to live broadcast my MMOs and really be in the moment with everybody and then do additional content around that and then do my podcasting in addition to it. So that's kind of how I pieced it together.
No, that's awesome. That's actually absolutely incredible. And it's a big endeavor too, which is why I was wondering. So I was like, how do I wanted to start picking up Nier, and then a lot of people were, love first impressions. And the only MMOs I'd actually played recently were WoW was my big one, and then Final Fantasy 14. And I just started Guild Wars 2. And people were like, oh, it'd be cool to hear comparisons to LOTRO, SWTOR, and ESO, which I haven't really played. And they're all completely different. And so it's just like, they're on the list. I don't really know when that's going to happen. Maybe after I do the podcast with Rook, I'll figure it out because maybe she'll have some insight. We'll see. So do you actually have, we're talking so much about how they're so community-based. Do you have guilds and FCs in all of these MMOs? And do you actually run them, or do you have people to kind of help you out and put events together and things like that?
Yeah, we have guilds and FCs for our main. So Final Fantasy 14 and Guild Wars 2. And we do technically have auxiliary ones in like Warframe and Elder Scrolls Online. We have a clan in Destiny, those sorts of things. We have a Minecraft server for subscribers. However, I couldn't do any of it without a moderation team and a group of people to help with that. And even with that, it really depends on what I have the time to do, right? And what our group has an interest to do and in doing, and how many people kind of show up to events and things like that. So because they are sort of specific to that and not, like a, 5-streamer alliance, FC or guild, it really is based off of what we can do at any given time. But we had some really wonderful people that early on in Guild Wars 2, for example, really wanted to set up raid groups. And I said to them, like, great, if you want to do raid groups, I will be at them. I will help with them. I will do whatever I can to do this. But, we will need people to do it and to sort of take responsibility for this on the nights that I'm not there or stuff like that. Because we had so many people that wanted to do it. we were sitting there like, well, we have 3 full parties already, but I can't be every night. There's just no way, and I do my own rating in 14 and all sorts of stuff. So it was like, how are we going to do this? So we started doing some like hierarchies where moderators are sort of our like guild leads or free company leads. And then on my Discord and places like that, I started bringing in a group of people that I just labeled as guides. So like guides for the channel or guides for our different social groups who may not have like the actual like regulating responsibilities of a moderator. So they don't have that pressure. They don't, need to be at stream at least at some point, doing stuff there or banning people but they're mostly like the hype squad and they help support and coordinate events for our different, FCs and guilds. So we have raid leaders that volunteer to sort of lead those raid groups throughout the week. We have, just an amazing group of people. We have some fantastic people that I've been doing RP events with and D&D events with. So I couldn't do it without that help. And I mean, there are periods of time where, we do say like, hey, we're taking a little break or, people just can't do this right now. But it's definitely something we wanted to have be there as a part of the community and as a function for the community.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And during those times when you're trying to gauge interest and figure out what your interest is in other games, specifically for patch cycles or what works better for the community at the time, it might be a little bit of a taboo thing to ask, not for Final Fantasy XIV because it's encouraged, but would you leave everything open or like would you stop a sub to something and be like, hey guys, I'm not doing this right now, I'm kind of canceling it and I'm focusing on this, but then I'll come back to it and then like resubscribe later, maybe like World of Warcraft?
Yes. Auxiliary games, yes. My main games, no. So I guess I'm thinking now you have me thinking about how I think about this, which is great. No, I love it. I love it. I kind of think about it like content creation, if you kind of almost imagine a bunch of spheres, right? So like at the core of what your channel is about, or like a solar system, right? Yeah. At the core, the sun, whatever it is, you have to kind of anchor down with an expectation that like, if this is going to be something that you build your core content around, and if you're not true variety, which I mean, some people have better and worse luck with growing with. It's usually a longer process to like bring people in over a lot of those different titles. So for me, I decided to kind of solar system, I guess you could say, where at the core, the heart, the sun, we have these 2 things, which is Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy XIV. And then around that, everything else orbits. So, if we start playing Warframe, yes, there may be like a few weeks where we play it more and I give people a heads up, like, hey, we're playing it a couple days or we're doing this story thing or stuff like that. But we'll always have Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy XIV at least one day a week. If it's special content that has just come out for 14 and Guild Wars 2, takes a back burner, or Guild Wars 2 gets new content and 14 takes a back burner, I tell people like really clearly, this week we have new content. Next week we'll be back with blank. And I try to make sure that I'm keeping some kind of equivalent balance between the way that I am scheduling those 2 always. So with those 2, it's never like we just drop them because I truly consider them to be the core. But for all of the others that kind of orbit around, like ESO or stuff like that, they may not show up on stream. Like, now, does that mean that I'm dropping subs to them? Not always. I mean, I pretty much always am subbed to ESO. I just like ESO. But, there may be other games that I don't play for a huge amount of time. And I try to just give people that expectation as we go into it. Like, I don't know how much I'll stream this one, or, we're trying this out and maybe if we feel like it's something good, we could add it in. But I don't add something in long term without like really, really examining it or vetting it, because I want to make sure that my live stream days have the most focus that we can and that my schedule, we have both communities feeling like they aren't ever out in the cold,
Right. Absolutely. And you had mentioned that you had people who wanted to set up raids and help people into other community aspects. What is it that is if you have a favorite part of an MMO, what is it that you like to focus on because it's your absolute favorite? Like, is it raids? Is it PvP? Is it crafting? Like, what is it for you?
It's tough because this is never something I use seriously as like this is a real reason, but it kind of is. I'm a Gemini, so with that, I can't just do one thing. I like variety. I like really contrasting experiences. If I had to narrow it down, the 2 would be I love endgame raiding and I love role playing. Like it's those two things. And a lot of times people think that those two communities are polar opposites, or if you're a
Yeah,
role
I've
player,
heard
you
that.
can't be a raider, or if you're a raider, you can't be a role player. And it's so silly to me because I fell in love with the game first. And like you, I love the lore of games. I love the world. I love the characters. I love my character's role in it. I
Absolutely.
love tearing it apart, and nitpicking it and like learning everything that I can. And that was why I also wanted to get into raiding, because
Mhm.
I wanted to feel the full experience of the game. I wanted to know what it really felt like to be in this epic struggle. And I
Right.
wanted a fight that matched that for me, and that I would feel like, yes, I'm the hero if I take it down. So to me, they aren't separate things. To me, they really are kind of two sides of the same coin. It's just that like one lets me kind of engage with the mechanical game, and one lets me engage with the narrative, the story, the lore, the creativity of the game.
Right. No, that's awesome. That's actually probably the best answer that I could have gotten.
How
But
about you?
I'm
How
gonna
about you?
for me?
Yeah, wait.
Okay.
How about you, Xandrii? What do you like most?
For Final Fantasy 14, I thought that it was the story. And I thought that it was the idea that everything you did had story. So it was kind of like, especially coming from World of Warcraft, where you had your quest, right? And it was like, go kill 5 boar. And you're like, why do I have to kill 5 boar? And everyone's like, the village needs to eat. And you're like, the village is going to be okay with only 5 boar. Okay. So, and so with 14, it was cool because it was like, you had unlock quests that had a story. You have normal raids that have a story. And then on top of that, you have Savage that almost has an addendum to the story and extra cutscenes and cinematics in a fight, which some people don't like because of parsing on their spreadsheet, but it's there and it's so cool because it's different. And you get that extra added piece for doing that extra added difficulty. But I actually, because I've been playing more of Guild Wars 2, and I was talking with Llama Todd, and I think, because I've taken a break from 14, and I think what I missed the most and what I liked the most was actually just raiding. And it's because the rating is so different from any rating I'd ever done before. So it seems, because it's more of a dance and more proactive than reactive, and then the idea that the further you are from the West Coast, you have more ping, and so you have to deal with, the AoEs in a different way, and whether or not they're telegraphed and tells and things like that. And it's just, it's like your gameplay is on a whole different level. And I think not even that, but actually learning the fights and having people learn the fights with me was probably the coolest part. Not even downing it, just like figuring out how it worked and how every single person has a different timing for things that they would have to use, especially with, if you're healing or a caster and you're trying to like get a heal off and move really quick or anything like that is just so cool. And for Guild Wars 2, I think it's more of exploration than anything else. Like, yeah, I'm super interested in the lore. I just bought Ghost of Ascalon, so I'm really excited. I'm on like chapter 4, and I can't wait to get to raids or PvP, but I'm purposely not stepping into them because I think the environment is so gorgeous. And I've never been a completionist before. Well, I have for Final Fantasy VII, but that's different. I've never been a completionist before. And so the idea is that the zones are so pretty. The idea that they have vistas and the way that the questing works and having those hearts makes you actually talk to people and explore even more. And so I think that's what's keeping me hooked right now. And the idea that you can get experience from everything whilst also having people just kind of be around. Like it actually feels like an MMO. And I think that although granted, my only other MMOs that I've played are WoW and Final Fantasy 14, but it feels like those other things, whilst still having that multiplayer feel and that group feel, don't feel like at its core that it's as much of an MMO out in the open world. In a city, yes. In a raid, yes, but not necessarily out in the open world. I don't know. Do you have the same take? Do you feel the
Yes.
same
Oh my
way?
gosh. 100%. I absolutely agree. Like, it's tough because when you're looking at different MMOs, I think there are different answers to this question, just like you pointed out. Like, for me in Guild Wars 2 and also ESO by extension, the open world is a huge thing. But Guild Wars 2 does something, like you said, that's so special. I don't know, have you done the meta events or world bosses yet at all?
I've done, I did one meta event and it was, oh my gosh, it was
Is a
in
bunch of
Wayfarer
centaurs?
Foothills.
Okay,
So it was that like you had to deal with the Jormag statue, and then the like shaman dude came out and you had to kill him, and then the other one was Shadow Behemoth, and I died so many times. I didn't know, so I knew that there wasn't like a specific meta, right? And I knew that there would be mechanics, and so I'm trying to kill creatures that are coming out of the portal behind the boss because I'm thinking my build is a DPS build. So I'm like, and they're like, yeah, so you have to kill the guys coming out of the portals so they don't overtake us, right? I'm like, okay, not thinking that because I wasn't with the party at the front of the boss, I wasn't going to get heals or shields
or boons or anything,
boons or condition removal or anything. And so I'm just dying to these ads over and over, and I'm not understanding what I'm doing wrong. So I have done them, not well, but I've done them.
You know what? That's the beginning Guild Wars 2 experience, and you do not have to be ashamed of it. I think it's some of the most fun, right? Because Guild Wars 2 is a game that, at least at first, feels as though it's very simple, especially when you play a lot of other MMOs that may have more of that like traditional WoW rotation or like the big blocks of abilities, like in Final Fantasy XIV. But there's so much to uncover in the different playstyles, skills, abilities, the rating, the PvP. There's so much. And the open world really shines in Guild Wars 2 because, just like you said, it is one of the few MMOs, especially with those metas, with those world bosses, and even more of them as you get like later and later into the game and you get into some of the hard ones. It's so fun because those are still some of my most memorable moments from that game. And I will run those like every day. I never get sick of them. I love them because you're right. It's like, there are so many MMOs, I think, that obviously and for good reason worry about, oh, well, we can't have all these players doing stuff in this one zone. The graphics are going to explode. People can't do it. You just wouldn't even be able to tell what's happening. And then you have Guild Wars 2 and they're like, yeah, you don't know what's happening, but you got to have fun. And I'm like, sign me up. I love it. It's something that shines. So I totally agree. For me, in Guild Wars 2 and ESO, by extension, I think the exploration is one of the biggest parts of that game. You should enjoy every second, so don't let anybody rush you. Have fun.
Absolutely. And with you talking so much about ESO, that was actually one of the games I tried to play, and I don't know how it feels later on, but I couldn't get past the tutorial. And it's just, it was kind of the Guild Wars 2 thing, where everyone's like, you should try Guild Wars 2. You should try Guild Wars 2. And I'm like, well, you have to dodge. And I've played Dark Souls. And let me tell you, I'm not good at it. And then just the idea that you have so many things that you can swap for builds, which ended up being fun, but it was a completely different combat than I'd been used to. And so for ESO, one of the big things for me was it felt like Skyrim. And it was so weird because I know that you can play in third person, but it's so weird for me to have it be first person. And the tutorial was just, I don't know, the controls were different and it's such a different combat style. So I'm just curious as to what drew you to ESO? What do you like about it? Did you like the tutorial and the new player experience? And if you could compare that to, Final Fantasy XIV and Guild Wars 2, since those are the games that you play so much recently.
Yeah, for sure. ESO is just kind of unique. And it is one that is, I think, out of all the MMOs on the market right now, probably the most polarizing. I know a lot of people who love MMOs and they get into ESO, and like you said, within 5 minutes, they're like, I hate literally everything about this. And then I know other people who, like me, get into it and I'm delighted by it, right? But with all of that said, I mean, I came into it with a background of having grown up playing all the Elder Scrolls games, and I loved them. And as you get further into the game and past that tutorial, it is kind of deceptive, honestly, that they start you out in first-person mode. It's obviously a throwback to, like, the greater franchise to some degree, and or Skyrim directly, Oblivion, recent titles, but almost everyone who actually plays that game plays it in third person. So it's like, that is a huge part of it, especially as you start getting into some of the other content in the game, because you just cannot feasibly play. I'm sure somebody plays in first person still, but it is no fun and it's miserable and you can't see any of the tells. So third person is how people usually play it. And with ESO, I think it just takes a bit of time, especially if you want to give it a fair shake, because the experience is so different compared to something like Final Fantasy XIV and Guild Wars 2, right? I think that the exploration and open world, again, shines. I think it surpasses 14. And I love 14. I love 14 to death. But the questing, the zones, the open world, the nature, like, you can be walking around in this gorgeous forested landscape and see like a beaver building a dam or a bear scratching its back against a tree. There's all these little details that are so vibrant. All of the quests are fully voiced. The zones have these like really rewarding, massive scale achievements, collections, all sorts of stuff that you can do. Each zone is its own thing as well. So you have all this freedom where like you walk into a new map that interests you. You can literally just walk into any of them and you automatically sync. You can automatically begin exploring. If you have friends, you all will just sync to the zone. You will do quests together. They'll check off in your quest log if you're like grouped and you're both on the same quest. Like it's so fun in that sense because it really does feel like a kind of sandbox MMO in a sense, but it has great story and great moments. The combat is clunky, especially compared to Guild Wars 2. Like weapon swapping and everything in Guild Wars 2 is so smooth. ESO does still have its hangups. There are times where you hit something, you hit it 5 times, it doesn't go off. There's another time you try to swap your weapon. Try to swap your weapon for like 10 years, it does not swap. You try, like, there's graphical little bugs, there's all sorts of stuff. It's not as smooth as Guild Wars 2, but with that said, there's kind of a fun chaos to it. It's not as precise as Final Fantasy XIV or Guild Wars 2, and I think that the endgame content compared to the other two, there is challenge to be found, but it is nowhere near, especially Final Fantasy XIV, but even in Guild Wars 2, where I think there's slightly more precision. But at the same time, there's something really fun about being in this hard thing as like a healer or something where you only have this one circle that you use and you're like screaming as you chase your allies around trying to drop this thing over and over and over on their head. Yeah, like it's chaos, but at the same time, it's really fun. And the exploration and I think just the variety of it makes it really enjoyable alongside other MMOs. But again, it's divisive. Not everybody falls in love with it. People, may not particularly resonate with it. But I think the game itself has done so much to improve the experience. Even now with this new expansion that's coming out, they're introducing a whole new hub for starting zones and tutorials. Whereas like a new player, you come in and you'll have these choice of doors and you can pick which of the like tutorial quests you want to do because each one features differently in each X pack. They're adding in companions, which are like levelable trusts essentially, except that you can actually take them out into the open world. You can do like companion quests for them. You can build a relationship with them. There's versions of them that will hang out in your home instance and talk to you. And like you can even map the NPCs to like walk routes in your house. Like ESO is being so creative in a lot of ways. And I think that energy and constant desire to improve is constantly making the game more and more and more unique within a genre that has a lot of precedent set by WoW, and other titles. So that's the long version. I mean, there's so much to compare in each of those games, but
that's totally fine. I'm over here going, okay, I'm gonna download that after today's podcast. Cool, that's what I'm gonna do tonight. No, that's fun. Awesome.
It's fun. It's a good time.
And so, comparing 14 and Guild Wars 2. Is there anything that, because you love the game so much, and those are your 2 main games other than your auxiliary games that you had mentioned, is there anything that you think could be taken from one another? Like something that you think would be beneficial for Guild Wars 2 to take from 14 and vice versa?
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh geez, yeah. There's a huge list. I mean, we even pointed some of it out, right? I think that Guild Wars 2 could really benefit from a more robust, all game modes, right? They have some really interesting and really diverse game modes, but particularly when it comes to PvE instanced content, so things like raids and fractals. I think that we've seen in 14, 14 has such a strong community for endgame raiding for everything from Extreme Primals through Boja to Savage to Ultimate. And while sure, there is like a small portion of the population comparatively that does those things, the fact that like the release schedule and the content and the quality of a lot of it has been so solid. I mean, pandemic delays and stuff aside, right? Like that's something where the community always tends to know this is exactly what's happening here and this is what I can expect. And if I'm invested in this facet, then I'll be into it. With Guild Wars 2, they're a no sub game. The whole base game is free. Both the expansions are bundled together for $30. They are constantly making it as cheap for players or as like non-existent cost-wise as possible. And so their release schedules and things are just affected by the nature of their revenue model.
Right.
But unfortunately, it means that with things like raids or these other high effort, large scale sort of PvE things, there's huge gaps in the releases. And I think that they lose some of their community in those gaps and the, uncertainty of what's going to be coming up. So I would love it if and they've been experimenting. They've been experimenting with some new types and some new things that they could do that might be more manageable regularly for them with that kind of release. So, I mean, I think they're on the right track. I just hope they continue to solidify it, because I think Final Fantasy XIV has proven that if you have that kind of cool content, people do want to do it. And I mean, the fact that we still have 3 raid groups that run every week, people love these raids. They want to do them in Guild Wars too. They want more, So I think that is something they could invest in. Vice versa, I think that Final Fantasy XIV, we were just talking about open world, I love when they do stuff like the special fate bosses. I love when they have things like the Dataki Chronicles, that like fate chain. But I think that so many of the zones are beautiful. They're great role-playing backdrops. But why are you there after the story? There's like no reason, unless you're farming for something really specific, or relic quests are making you go there. Or we got a few fun quest chains with like Serpent of Ronka and stuff with Shadowbringers. But they just aren't the same. And the open world is so wonderful, and there's so much there. I just wish there was more to do on it. I wish that it wasn't just hunt trains. I wish that there were these really cool discoveries that you could make. I wish that we had more things like those big meta events, or even stuff like an open world dungeon, kind of like Castrum, or some way that they can integrate that, or critical engagements in our actual open world zones where it kind of does something dynamic, just something. Because what we have right now, I think, doesn't fully live up to the scale and lore and immersion of 14. I think we could have a much more dynamic world.
Absolutely. I think my big one was the Tempest, because it's like, well, not the whole Tempest, but like in the area for Amarat. You have these huge buildings, and you have this amazing story, and you have all of these fantastic NPCs, and you literally go there to unlock a dungeon after doing a quest chain, and then there's nothing except for that hunt that's like right near that area. And it's like, but it's so beautiful. Like, you don't want it to stagnate. You don't want all of their hard work to never go anywhere. Although, to be fair, how you had mentioned the Relic quest line, as much as it's unfortunate that it kind of forces people to go there if they're not doing stuff in Boja. I'm really bad at pronouncing that. But I do think it's a really, really neat way to integrate old content in old areas into current content. Like, it was smart. But if they could do that for something like that for everything, and not have it be like a higher drop rate than their current content, and having to like release patches to make their current content like higher drop rates for the relic pieces, for those memories, it would have been a lot better, in my opinion. Well, not better. It just would have made it more immersive for all of the other areas that they work so hard on. So yeah. I completely agree.
I completely agree with you too. And I mean, I had the same moment with Amarat, where you get through the stuff there, and I was like, there's gotta be some kind of quest chain here. There's gotta be hidden lore if I go down there, because like they're still here. The specters are still here, and we know that to some degree you can like listen to them or overhear them or do stuff. But there wasn't. And I was so surprised, because like you said, that work, this world that they've crafted, it is so beautiful. I mean, there are so many players that would love to do that. And we've seen them branch out with some of the side quests and things. We've seen even with like the void quests and stuff like that. But again, it's kind of like a thing that's behind a thing that's behind a thing as opposed to just like, I walked into a zone and I had a journey, and somebody came up to me and they were like, hey, this thing, and do you know about that? And you're like, whoa, I didn't. So you go on an adventure, We get that with the main story, but we don't get that necessarily with the actual just sort of, I guess, afterplay, except in very specific instances,
No, absolutely. And with both of these having big expansions coming up, what are you excited about for Endwalker? What are you excited about for End of Dragons? And what, when they release, do you think that you will do first?
I mean, story in both. That's the big one, because I just want to know about the story. But I mean, we obviously just had FanFest, which we are all still, I think, collectively losing our minds over. I mean, just to be real.
Yep.
So I mean, the new classes and male VR were a big thing for me, and there's a lot to talk about with the whole VR release and all sorts of stuff with that, both pros and cons. But I am still really excited, and I'm really, really happy to see the race rounded out. And I'll be making RP characters and all sorts of stuff, I'm sure, day one. But for me, the big drive is going to be getting through the story. I want to see the new content. I want to experience all of it. I think I'm going to pick up Sage, Reaper. I mean, I'll get them both, but I don't know,
Right.
if I'm going to like level one before I start anything else, because usually I just cannot resist and I just have to do the story. So for me, that's going to be the big haul first for both of them. In Guild Wars 2, I mean, we are getting our news soon about the expansion stuff. We're getting our first peek here in the next couple months. So right now we're all kind of like, I don't know, Cantha, dragons? Which I'm already pretty excited about, because the dragon storyline and the dragons in particular are one of the, like, I'm a really big dragon nerd.
Me too.
I'm
That's
so
so
glad.
nice to hear. I'm like,
so
dragons books. That's literally a meme in my chat. So it's so nice hearing someone else be like, I'm such a big dragon fan.
I feel so goofy when I say it. I'm so glad that this is a safe space where we can just admit this.
Absolutely.
Because like I grew up on Dragon Rider books, like fantasy and all those kinds of stuff. Like I have always loved dragons. In D&D, I love dragons. I love like any interpretation of them, So for me, it was really exciting that we had, which doesn't seem like it would be revolutionary, but to have like an MMO where dragons are of such a massive scale. And I mean, I even love the dragon stuff in WoW, but like there's just something about the way they realized it in Guild Wars 2 that to me was like, this is the fantasy.
Right.
And then as you get like later stuff and how far are you in it? Which expansions are you in right now?
I haven't even gotten into the expansion. Yeah, my character is level 55. I have an elementalist, but I do know some stuff because every single, like going into Divinity's Reach, and they have that little library and you can read about all of the elder dragons. I know it's not all of them, but just the idea that they're different elements too. Like you actually have crystal, which is cool, and I believe that's Kralkatoric. And then having like Zaitan and having it extend so far back into like Guild Wars 1 to where you can actually see like where the dragons were, and people were pointing out on the map where the actual like scar was, kind of like Deathwing in World of Warcraft, how there's the the scar there, and it's just, I love it. It's super. I'm one of those people that will go into one of those rooms like, okay, so I chose the Priory first. And I went into the library in the Priory and I interacted with every single book you could interact with and read all of it. So I'm not super far because of it, but I know where you're heading, essentially.
Yes. Well, I don't want to spoil anything. I mean, are we also the same person? Because I've had the same journey. I also did Priory first, and read all the books. I love it. Like the dragons are so cool. That story continues to evolve in scale and scope. I won't say anything more than that. But there's some really cool, like personal ways that it starts connecting to the protagonist. And for me, getting that sort of culmination of the dragon narrative and all this kind of stuff that we have, which isn't the end of Guild Wars 2. It's much like Endwalker and 14 in that it's just the end of a long scale arc.
Oh, thank you. Like it needs to be said, but like it doesn't need to be said, but it needs to be said.
People always ask, and you're like, no. Like Yoshida-san stood on stage and said 50 times this is his life's work, and it's the same with like Guild Wars 2, where you've got Ruby who's out there just like, the game is not ending. It is not dead. We have more players than ever,
Absolutely.
So End of Dragons is the same kind of deal. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm hoping that we get some new raids and stuff, or fractals. I don't know. We'll see. I'm really excited about the new elite specializations, which we don't have any details about, but they're kind of like the equivalent of new classes. So I'm really looking forward to that, because they give you more weapons, more skills, more play styles, all of that good stuff, which is great. And I am on the train of, I got my male Viera and confirmation of female Hrothgar in Final Fantasy XIV. I am on the train of like, I believe that we will get Tengu, the bird race, in Guild Wars 2. I believe it. I'm just going to hold on. I'm going to manifest that reality. I believe there's no precedent for it. We haven't gotten like new races in Guild Wars 2, but I will probably be making a Tengu like right off the bat if they do release them. So otherwise I'll just be doing the story and then heading towards, endgame stuff and all that good stuff.
And they're gorgeous too. I think I just came across Tengu in Lion's Arch. There's an area that you're not supposed to go in that they're kind of guarding. And I was so excited because people, or I'd heard at least that people were really excited about Tengu. And then I saw that and I was like, oh, that's what they look like. They're not like, Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that. Like, they're so cool. Not that they're not cool in those tabletop games, but they're really cool. And so that was really neat. I would have my heart set on Skrit, though. I know it's probably not going to be a thing, but I think the Skrit are so cute.
They're so good.
They're so cute. And for Endwalker, honestly, just the confirmation of the endeavors that they're pushing out. Like, they know that there's been delays for things for COVID and Soken, but it's just like the amount that they actually want to put in for Endwalker. Like, we already have the model for the male Viera, but we are also promising Hrothgar and hopefully, all of the extra options that go with that, with like the headgear and things like that.
Yeah.
But also the story, the raids, the ultimate with Nidhogg and Thoradin, and Estinian being part of the MSQ. Like, it's really exciting. And I think I'm more excited for the female Hrothgar because there's so much detail in the fur for the Hrothgar, but they're so big. Okay, so hot take, but they're big and bulky and they kind of run funny. And so I was really excited to have a female Hrothgar, to have that amount of detail in the fur, but maybe be like, more feminine for glamour and maybe like prance a little bit better. I don't know what you think about that.
No, it's funny to me because honestly, I mean, everybody always makes fun of me because I'm a strong proponent for women who can step on me or crush me. So,
me too.
Yes, excellent. I'm so glad we did this podcast.
I know, right?
It's like, I don't ever, like, I get what you're saying, because I don't ever want it to be like, I want like some little petite, dainty girl. Like, no, yeah. I want a female Hrothgar that can destroy me. Like, I want that very much. But I kind of agree because, did you play 10?
I did. Yes, I did.
So like coming from 10, right? Where you have like the Ronso, obviously they adapted like the Rugadin model for Hrothgar, and it's fine. I know a lot of people who love them, but in my mind, I was always thinking Kimahri, Right. And so I was thinking more of that kind of like, yes, still like powerful, still strong, but kind of more lean, more leonine, more, that kind of like big cat feel where it's not necessarily that they're like all like really big and hulking. It's like this very strong powerful frame, but it's just different, if that makes sense.
No, I understand.
So it's like, I know that they did what they had to do in 14 to realize it and to make them something that, would work and would fit in existing gear. But I'm kind of hoping that with female Hrothgar, we get closer to that ideal, like you said, that more like streamlined predator as opposed to like, and I don't want them to be dainty and dinky. Like I want them to still be really strong. It's just that I think, yes, they're going to be really good, I think, if they do it right.
I know. I don't know. I'm just so excited about it because I'm thinking of like the female Ronso that, like you said, that you could see in 10 for Blitzball. And oh my gosh, if they implemented Blitzball, they still haven't said, because they said in the announcement showcase there was going to be something in the gold saucer that was going to be multiplayer, and I want it to be Blitzball. I don't know how you feel about Blitzball or PvP as a whole, even if you wanted to elaborate on that. What do you think? What are you hoping for? Are you hoping for Blitzball? Or are you hoping for those PvP changes to really take hold?
It's funny. I can get behind PvP. I've even, there have been times where I've actually enjoyed PvP pretty well in Final Fantasy XIV. But when it comes down to it, it's just not something that most of the player base seems to care about.
Right.
Like, there is a dedicated group that are very invested in PvP. And, you compare that with something like Guild Wars 2, where PvP is a massive part of the community. It's a huge focus in that game. Even in WoW, where like PvP is something that is like really big. ESO as well. I don't think it was as much in some of the other ones like SWTOR and things, but in those games in particular, PvP has a big, strong presence.
Right.
It's not really the same in 14, and I think that's for a bunch of reasons, partially just because of the nature of the combat, and like you were talking about with lag or with server delays or with things like that, it isn't as instantaneous kind of combative as some of those more exciting, dynamic PvP modes that we see in other games. There's still a lot of fun to be had, but it's just different. With something like Blitzball, I mean, I hope they put it in. It's iconic, it's fun, and it would give us some reason to have underwater capabilities, please. I just, like, they put in all these gorgeous underwater zones in Stormblood. But like, when have we ever actually used them for anything that is dynamic in any sense? You know,
Right.
I would love to see them adapt that and use it for something. And, you know, maybe even be able to reuse some of those assets for different arenas and stuff like that for Blitzball, which I think would just be a smart move. So for me, I'd love to see that. Yeah, I think it was great in 10, even though in 10, you know, it's its own level of infuriating as you try to get like the perfect ending.
Yep, absolutely. And it's like, why? Why is it Blitzball and then dodging lightning a bajillion times? Why?
Yeah, it's something else. I mean, I'm hoping that maybe that's what we get. And we have some other little 10 peaks, you know, there's a little bit of 10 integration and other stuff that's in there, so Blitzball would make sense. I'm actually weirdly excited, and I'm curious how you feel about it too, about the Stardew Valley Final Fantasy Harvest Moon simulator that we're getting.
I actually think it's cool. And my reasoning for it is kind of odd. So I've seen people stream Stardew Valley, and I had someone actually purchase the new Animal Crossing for me. And while I like the idea, it just wasn't for me. Like, immediately I was like, can I attack other people's farms? Like, can I
loot and pillage them and
Yeah,
their cute little animal friends?
Can I steal people's what was it, onions? What was the big
turnips?
Turnips, thank you. And I was like, can I like take them from people and then sell them? And they're like, no, it's just like a chill little, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm actually, I used to really love playing Harvest Moon. So I loved Harvest Moon on N64, and I played it on Game Boy as well. Totally different feels, but, and which was funny because I actually grew up in the boonies too. So like, I actually experienced it in real life, but I preferred it in a game. But just the way they handled it in N64 kind of reminds me of the way they want to do it in Final Fantasy XIV, which would be incredible. Like, and if you could actually have the minions that you own like all running around in there like the newest Pokemon, and like cooking for them and stuff, and then tending your own farm, I think it takes all of the things from Animal Crossing that people really like, but putting it into a more of an MMO environment, I guess, is the best way to put it, depending on how they actually handle it. But the other thing that would be really neat too would be, everyone gets upset about things like housing a savage, right? You know, not everyone gets a house. But if everyone has their farm, it's almost like you have that place. So like, what if they make it so that you have certain items that you can pick up in game that would normally, you know, you'd be excited to put up in your house, or you'd be excited to have an outfit on a mannequin in your house. But what if you could get those items like the Don Meg trellis and have it be in your farm? And it might help out those people that feel like they're missing out on that type of content because they can't get a house because it's so tough right now. So, I mean, what do you feel about it? Like, I honestly think that it's a big thing for the game. And I think that it's actually really cool. It's probably one of the biggest things that I'm looking forward to other than the MSQ.
Yeah, I feel very much the same. I mean, I like Sims and I can get into them, but I was kind of the same in that I knew I couldn't play something like Animal Crossing long term on stream because like there's this, it's weird. I need this like strange balance of like just active enough that I feel like, you know, even on days when we're doing chill content, I still feel like we have something going, there's some energy, there's some momentum, but it's not like so buck wild that you're having to just like go completely silent while you play, you know, like it's one of those things where it's nice to have some kind of action and stuff that you can do like with direction together. And of course, like people come up with stuff like that when they're, you know, streaming or, you know, doing all sorts of content for Animal Crossing. But for me, I tend to, yeah, kind of like, I need some kind of story. I need those like romanceable characters. I need goals. I need a little bit more structure. I love housing design, so I love stuff like that too. But I usually need like a world that to me feels just a little bit more like I can dig into it. And I mean, I'm sure you can dig into stuff with Animal Crossing, but like the world itself isn't, you know, super lore intensive or heavy, I would say. You know, like
no, I agree.
So like, so for me, I think this is perfect because in a world in which I do have that and a variety of content, I think I will really enjoy being able to go and do farm stuff whenever I feel like it. Plus, it gives you a little bit more of a reason to have those minions, collect those minions, do those different things that you don't really get to showcase because Lords of Verminion is terrible and nobody wants to play it because it's awful and it's so boring. I'm so sorry, Verminion. I tried as bad. But it'll give you like something to be able to do with those. And I think a lot of people, like you said, with the housing issue, that's a huge problem. And it's something that really, compared to other MMOs on the market that 14 is competitive with, they are falling behind in, right? So many other places have such diverse housing customization now. And then, of course, there's other games that just stubbornly still don't have it at all. World of Warcraft.
The things that I kind of want in Guild Wars too, maybe even in like a Guild War, you know, a Guild Hall at a certain level, you know, just
Guild Hall is super fun in Guild Wars too.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I just wish there were apartments. Like,
yes,
I know there's areas that you could designate for people, but it's like,
it's just not the same. I mean, that's something we're hoping for from the next X Pack, right? Like maybe they'll give us some kind of actual housing instance. That's not just your like, there's a different home instance, which is like fixed for everybody, but you can add crafting nodes to it and stuff like that, right? It's not the same as like designing your own interior. So all of that said, I think that being able to farm is a big thing for people who couldn't get houses with yards. And I mean, I think it gives them the opportunity to see how having these individual instances affects players and their server load. And then maybe even look at something like instanced housing, or like you said, have some kind of customization on this island that at least lets people feel like they have some property and they have a place in the world. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be really fun, and I hope that they have like really made it into a robust kind of new content for us.
Right. And I just love the idea that it might be something that, or I just love how Yoshi P is so influenced by other MMOs, because this is like something that they tried in Mists of Pandaria with dailies out in like, you know, the Jade Forest and places like that. And it just, or Four Winds, and it just didn't, people were excited about it, but it didn't take. And it was like during this whole like Plants vs. Zombies like big thing where that ended up being huge. And they were like, oh, let's try it in game. And it just didn't end up working the way they wanted it to work. So they ended up scrapping it. And it's cool that 14 is almost adopting something like that and making and having it be malleable to have it work for the way their community works. And hopefully it ends up being a really big thing that people are super interested in, especially if they can add other items that everybody's really excited about. And with that, is there anything with Endwalker for if we could have theories? Do you have any story theories, any like class theories? Who do you think is going to be our Reaper? Do you know who is going to be our Sage or Reaper teachers? Anything that you could possibly think of that would be not super spoiler, I guess, but kind of like, hey, this is my theory on what's going to happen.
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so many. We joke on Aetheryte Radio that we're always doing tinfoil hat theories like left and right because it's just the truth. I mean, I think my big one, and I was tweeting about this like during FanFest. I was so convinced. I was like pulling out all my pictures, you know, trying to like put together the whole thing. My big thing that I guess I've noticed is in some of the architectural touches between Sherlion and what we've seen of the Ancients and Amarat. Right. So in Sherlion, we see a lot of, you can call it the golden spiral, or you can relate it to a nautilus. Because I always thought it was more of a nautilus, but it technically does look like the golden spiral, which has to do with all sorts of fun stuff like the Fibonacci sequence and things. Essentially, these mappable, recurring, natural structures that happen throughout all sorts of patterns of life. Right. And there's this larger scale symbolism with it that it, you know, for a long time with various philosophers or, you know, various people was used as sort of a proof for intelligent design. The idea that there could be a deity or deities or something or someone that essentially left their thumbprint when they were designing us in all of these different things. That, you know, if life can be calculated, it can be recreated. So all this stuff, right? And with Sherlion, we see this nautilus. And then with, you know, the Ancients, we see what look like DNA helixes, which are actually also an example of the golden ratio and, you know, the golden slice. But they're actually a more perfected form than the nautilus, which in and of itself, there's a lot of debate whether or not the nautilus even actually conforms to this or not. So all of that said, because it's a, a naturally recurring thing, but it's not perfect. It's, it's imperfect in the way that it gets created. So with all of that said, my big belief is that Sherlion knows a lot more about the ancients than they've let on, and may have even discovered their, ancient ruins, like that floating city that we saw, or that sort of bunker type deal that, labyrinthos down below. It can mean like a twisting maze, or labyrinth can also refer to like the inner ear, which is shaped like a nautilus and registers sound.
Yeah.
And we know there was the sound in the ancient days, right? So that caused this big downfall. So in my mind, I think there's a lot of these like little threads that, whether they're doing it intentionally to say, Sherlion has known about this for a long time, and they themselves are like keeping apart from the world because they know what happened, or they know some really key thing, and they've decided that they are going to stay like a bastion against the whole world for this knowledge, possibly led by Vinat or the masked figure or Heidelin's heart or whatever. We have all these theories from like the picture and all this stuff, right?
Which
but
is amazing, especially for the trailer too, because he's like, no, we have to protect our people. Like, we can't help you with Stola. Yeah. Oh, okay. I see where you're coming from. That's cool.
Yeah, I think that they have been emulating their civilization, even down to like the Greek influences, right? I think they've been emulating their civilization from the get-go off of what they know of the ancients. And that for whatever reason, they think that, if they are the only ones who survive, whatever calamity they know is coming, then they will be the ones that, will be worthy of starting a new world. So like, that's where I'm at with everything. And I'm kind of like, I'm curious to see. I'm convinced that Xenos might become an ally as well.
Thank you. Oh my gosh.
I don't even like Xenos.
Because how many times has Yoshi P said he really feels like he's your friend? And I'm like, oh my gosh. He has a scythe. He's going to be the Reaper class trainer because he, is going to, because he's going to have a redemption story. I don't know. Although I'm tired of him.
I know.
I really am. But I do feel like he's going to end up being an ally somehow. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense as a subversion of our expectations, right? And in that like image that we got, we don't see Fanny Pack, which is what I call Fantaniel. We don't see him. We don't totally know. I mean, there's a lot of debate still about who the true, I guess you could say, enemy is, if there even is one. So for me, I'm very curious about that. I'm curious too about how Thev Nair and Radzat Han ties into everything, with their own knowledge and specialization and history and culture. But my big one right now, my big theories tend to be around Sherlion and the ancients. That's sort of where I've been investing.
Which is incredible, because one of the things that I really loved out of the trailer was just that it's all of the lines from Amarat too. And then you actually see all of the creatures from like the end of days there. And I'm just like, oh, that is such a cool implementation. Like, that is so neat. And you can build so many theories around that. And it's like, you know how you mentioned the tinfoil hat theories. It's like everybody thinks a certain thing, and Yoshi P is just like, you're not really close. Nope. So I'm excited to see how it actually plays out too. And with talking about Endgame and MSQ, and just because we don't know as much about End of Dragons, we will soon, but we don't know as much. So let's go back to the beginning. And the difference in the new player experience. What do you think you like, or each one could take from each other? And do you think that Guild Wars 2 has actually evolved with the new player experience, especially recently?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think both Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy 14 are pretty hands-on accessible for new players, right? Like 14 has a pretty slow build. So even if you're brand new to MMOs, you're going to have your 3 abilities, which is a big complaint from veteran MMO players that come to the game, where they're just like, how many more levels until I get my next one? Oh my gosh, Yep. But for like brand new players, it's an even playing field where they can come in, they've got their 3 abilities, they can figure out what is happening, and then they can, orient themselves with other stuff. However, with that said, I think that some of the like fine-tuning of abilities at certain thresholds, because of the, trimming of classes and new introduction of abilities for classes and redirection with classes that we've had, there are some weird, awkward gaps where I think players hit like level 50, or the first time you run Orm Vale, or the first time you do Stone Vigil, or where you can feel like as a new player, oh my gosh, I don't know what I need to make this easier, but I'm losing my mind. Like, so there's stuff like that. And then there's also stuff like the Hall of the Novice, I think could really stand a bit of an update for each of the roles and how they play. And I do think that stuff like guild tests are great learning tools, but there's just like, it's like nobody remembers to run them. There's no reason. Like people do them maybe the first time for experience because you get that bonus. But there's not really much in the game that kind of has continued to, you know, be like, hey, we're going to use these as a teaching tool. So all of that to be said, I think it's accessible. But there are certain areas where, like, if they want to have these guided experiences, I think that they could do a little bit better in updating how maybe some of the game reflects it now in 14. But, you know, new players can get it in play. Guild Wars 2 is sort of... Guild Wars 2 is so ambiguous and weird because I think out of all the MMOs that I play, Guild Wars 2 has changed the most from expansion to expansion. Like they overhaul directions of stuff that they want to do in this game. They introduce a whole new type of content. They have some new specific thing for one map in the game that if you didn't look at the achievements list, you had no idea it was even there. And with that, like a lot of the combat and stuff, it is accessible for new players. You can get in, you can just go. You pick up a weapon, you hit some buttons, and it's not like you're going to be in massive danger or anything like that, right?
Right.
But when it comes to more of the fine-tuned finessing of combat in Guild Wars 2, things like boons, how those play a role in what you're doing, the substats of your gear and how those support very specific builds that you're doing. You know, dodge rolls, timing them, how you use your resource meter. CC is a huge one. CC plays a massive role, particularly in things like later raids, specific boss fights, fractals, all that kind of stuff, strike missions when you eventually get them. CC is actually a massive tool that will determine whether or not you wipe. But you're not necessarily taught early on, like, look at these two different bars. Here's the health. Here's the CC. When the CC is in this state, you can't break it. When the CC is in this state, you can and you should or you'll die. So all of these things to be said, there's a ton of nuance in Guild Wars 2. But as a new player, I don't know if you truly get the full scope. And if you really know what to expect from just the core game, because the expansions have truly changed this game in good ways. But in ways that, like, especially veteran players coming into it may not always, like, know because the game just doesn't lay it out for them. So we've had some updates. They did with Guild Wars 2 recently go in and put in, like, a new set of achievements that are sort of, like, first-timer achievements that guide you through doing certain things that are kind of instructive as a new player. But I still think there could be a little more. They could definitely put something more robust in to orient people because as it is, the community and content creators do a ton of that, as opposed to the game itself doing it.
Right. And it's actually funny that you mentioned that because when I hit level 50, it was really cute because they have the little boxes that come up now. That it's like, pay attention to this, right? And I had a box that came up that was like, you can use combos. And I was like, I just hit level 50. Okay. Like, I just did a dungeon to hit level 50. Why are you telling me now? I mean, I knew, but it's just one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, combos and finishers are a thing. And I'm like, that should probably be a little bit earlier. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. But I've kept you for actually longer than I expected to keep you because this was fun.
It was super fun. Great.
So is there anything that you would like to leave everyone with, especially just for your content or a specific game or a feature in a specific game that you think people should, give a little bit more of a chance or that you can talk up and then just let everybody know where they can find you again?
Oh, geez.
It's a big question. I know.
There's a lot. I know, right? No, it's great though. I think rather than it being a feature or something in particular, right? I think that we just always have to give each other a chance in a community and in a game, right? It's one of those things where a lot of times Final Fantasy XIV and Guild Wars 2 are praised for their positive communities. And while I don't think anybody's out here and like, Zan, I feel like you and I are very much like we're the same about this. We have like the same kind of vibe where it's like, we want to endorse positivity in spaces, but not to say that it's like we shun critical discussion or we don't acknowledge, other things or serious matters in the world, but rather that I think sometimes in gaming, there can be this kind of tendency to, well, if you're not with me, you're against me, and I just know it. And, like will create these lines or these divisions, or, we'll try to pass these sweeping judgments about something or these polarizing opinions that aren't inclusive or aren't diverse or aren't really paying attention to the fact that MMOs are amazing because we can all be together and learn together and share a space together. And no matter who you are, what your background is, what your gender, your nationality, your sex, your culture, your, whatever, your sexual identity, it's one of those things where we can all come together and we can all be heroes together and we can all journey together. And particularly in these times when things are really rough, I've been a part of several mental health advocacy campaigns. But it's more important than ever now that I think we reach out, we connect, we support each other, and we, help each other and try to really make the spaces positive, especially with new expats on the horizon. Trying to, lend some helping hands to people who might be newcomers, or even to people who are just returning to the game and are looking for a reconnection to something that they loved. So my advice would be, go out there, try stuff. If you're waiting for the new X-Pack, try a new MMO. Do your best to extend that hand and be understanding to other people and create a space and an environment that you would want to be in, and that, is something to be proud of within our MMO spaces.
Absolutely. That's perfect. That was a lot more of a message than I was expecting. I'm over here like, oh, that's so sweet.
We talk about it a lot. It's very important to me. It's very important to me.
It should be important to everyone is kind of the thing, especially, well, I was going to say especially as a content creator, but not even that, just like someone who is having fun. And there are a lot of people who have issues in their daily lives where like playing a game like this and getting to be whoever you want to be is kind of, for lack of a better term, an escape. And people don't want to deal with, negativity and things like that. So that's absolutely amazing. And it's great that you're an advocate for all of those things and a part of all of those groups. And you had mentioned that you did stuff with Lightbringer as well. I think, were you on yesterday with, it was like Jabro and Loranity, and that's incredible. So it's so cool. Like the amount that the creators do for their communities and for their games, especially if they really love them, is absolutely, it's incredible. So I actually saw that, and I just wanted to tell you that because I thought it was really
you're
cool.
incredible too. I love all the stuff that you're doing and everything you're doing on YouTube and like fostering these discussions, and like thank you for asking me questions about stuff because I can ramble for days, but it's so fun to get to talk and to get to share, and especially as, content creators, but also, I mean, ultimately as players of the games that we love,
Absolutely. And it's cool when other people are like, oh yeah, I noticed that too, or oh yeah, I felt the same way. And it's like, oh, it's not just me. Okay, that's fun. But just for anyone who decided to stay for the whole thing, if you could just reiterate where they can find you, all of your socials, and what time you stream, what days you stream, just to make sure that everybody checks you out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Rook, aka BirdofChess. You can pretty much find me at BirdofChess everywhere. So Twitter at BirdofChess, YouTube BirdofChess, and twitch.tv BirdofChess. Typically, we aim for new YouTube videos on Tuesdays, live streams on Twitch Wednesday through Friday, and then the Aetherite radio podcast, Final Fantasy XIV podcast with Gamerscape on Saturdays. So that's usually where you can find me. There are variations. So I frequently do Lightbringers podcasts on Fridays. We have some other special events coming up here at the end of the month, including the Charity Braves fundraiser with Final Fantasy XIV that we're going to be doing. It's a big marathon that's happening with a bunch of other content creators next Friday, which is really fast, the 28th, for anybody who's listening to this, not when we are, May 28th. We're going to be doing a big thing there and, advocating and raising funds and all that good stuff. So I do a lot of things like that, and you can find me around, and I usually try to update on socials and on Discord and all that good stuff about what's happening when, so that you can tune in. That's typically what we do.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for a little bit. I appreciate it.
No, thank you.